No, that's accurate, Beverley. There aren't many revelations at all. In fact, there are very few big surprises and even fewer big announcements in the foreign policy space. Perhaps, of course, that's unsurprising. Given we are, after all, coming up to an election. There's even increasing speculation this might be the last election before the next the last budget before the next federal election. So the overwhelming focus is on domestic matters. A couple of things, though, worth pointing out in the foreign policy space, just to pick out one or two. The first you referred to, it's this pretty substantial investment, around $650 million in Australia's diplomatic footprint, its network, its property and its IT systems. Now, this is the second or third time that the government's invested some moderately substantial money in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. It argues that it was hopelessly underfunded and neglected by the coalition, and it's important to put some money back in. Now, this money won't go to opening new posts in new countries. What it will do is basically enhance the existing posts that we've got in the current diplomatic network. So that might, in some countries, for example, see us opening new chancelleries or new buildings in some of these countries. Opening or renting new premises to host the increasing number of Australian diplomats and officials from other departments who are coming into the city as Australia really builds up its presence there. More money for IT systems, in particular secure IT systems, which have been derided as pretty clunky, old-fashioned and prone to falling over within the department for quite some time, and money for other key initiatives in the region. So it's interesting that the government's continuing to prioritise DFAT, even though they're in pretty constrained financial circumstances. That probably does speak to a feeling in the government that it was really hopelessly neglected for a while and that it deserves more money and needs it as well. One other one to draw your attention to just quickly, there was a vague reference when James Marape, the PNG Prime Minister, came to Australia earlier this year for a dialogue with Anthony Albanese to continued budget support from Australia. Now it's been formally revealed in the budget papers that this is in fact a $600 million loan to PNG that was requested and signed off on late last year to basically prop up PNG's budget. Now, it's just worth noting, whilst this was put out by the Treasury in February, no one picked it up at the time. It's only now that it's come out in the budget papers that it's come to the attention of journalists. I think it points to a real lack of transparency from the government here. They had two opportunities during two prime ministerial visits by James Marape to put this on the public record, and because of political sensitivities, either here or in Port Moresby, they did not do so. So that does speak, I think, to some of the sensitivities around this issue, both in Australia and in Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, interesting. What sort of response have we had from the aid sector about development spending?
Look, it's been very varied. Some aid organisations are relatively happy. World Vision, for example, has come out saying that it believes that this is a worthwhile aid budget and that the government's decision to modestly boost aid by around $130 million in this coming financial year is a welcome one. Other groups are much more critical. One member of the aid community said it was a deeply underwhelming budget. We haven't yet got a release from the peak body ACFID, but I imagine that's going to land in my inbox very soon. Initial steer from them is that they see a lot more room for improvement from this government and a lot more room for the government to really massively lift development spending, given the existential challenges posed by climate change, pandemics and other threats throughout the region. I don't think anyone in the aid community was expecting a massive increase to aid spending, and what we've got at the moment, where you've essentially got modest increases, plateauing, and then some increases, again, modest ones in the future, is definitely better than it could be. But the sector as a whole still believes that there's a vast gap between what the government needs to do and what it's doing at the moment. And I don't think the increased investments that we've seen, as welcome as they might be, will change that narrative. Also, just worth noting briefly, Beverley, that unsurprisingly, Tuvalu is a big winner in this budget, even though all of these increases are contained within the existing aid budget. As the government announced last week, we're going to see about $100 million ploughed into its key priorities. That comes after it signed a landmark agreement, Security and Migration Pact with Australia. The message from the government's pretty clear here. If you sign an agreement like this, it will bring benefits to you. That's a message it would probably like one or two other smaller Pacific nations to hear.
Indeed. Now, over recent days, we've seen the government making it clear that immigration is something that they want to rein in. Was it clearer from tonight's budget how they might go about this?
Not really, at least not at this stage. The government is cutting very slightly the skilled migration program, or just the permanent migration program, by around 5,000 places. But that's, not a really significant move. That's going from around 190 to 185,000 for the coming financial year. Of course, we already know that the government's likely to essentially draw down on the number of international students coming here with those tough new regulations that it's unveiled in recent days. Now, there's an interesting statement in the budget. It basically says that Australia's effective immigration rate is going to halve from the years immediately after COVID to next financial year, from around 500,000 to 250,000 people. Now, I think that's largely as a result of some of the huge numbers of people we saw, coming through the door after effectively all entrants were barred during the COVID pandemic. That artificial bump is easing away, so that will presumably draw down numbers somewhat. On top of that, you've got these slight reductions in the formal migration program, and you've also got, of course, probably an impact with international students as well. What will be interesting is whether that can get to the government to its apparent target of getting immigration down to what it says are much more manageable levels. And it's also going to be interesting to see whether immigration remains a hot topic of debate throughout the week here in Canberra, particularly with the opposition leader Peter Dutton signalling that it's going to be a fairly big topic in his budget reply on Thursday this week. The government is clearly sensitive to this allegation that it's allowed migration to get out of control, and it's trying to send signals in this budget that it's taking steps to reduce numbers.
Yeah, Stepen, appreciate you bringing us all that information on a very busy day. Thanks for your time.
No problem. Thanks, Beverley.